It wasn't a phone call. It wasn't a text message. It wasn't even a conversation. It was a receipt. A hotel receipt that fell out of my nephew's jacket when he tossed it over the back of my kitchen chair. He'd come by to borrow my truck, same as he'd done 100 times before. I was at the sink rinsing out my coffee mug and I heard it hit the floor. That soft flutter of paper, and I didn't think anything of it. I just picked it up to hand it back to him. The Marriott on Ridgewood Boulevard. 2 nights. Suite 214. Checked in on a Friday. The same Friday my wife had told me she was visiting her college roommate down in Savannah. I stood there holding that receipt for what felt like a full minute. My nephew was talking about the truck, asking if the rear brakes were still pulling. I heard his voice like it was coming from the bottom of a well. The name on the receipt wasn't his. But the date was his. And the hotel was 40 minutes from our house. I set it down on the counter and handed him my keys. I didn't say a word. My name isn't important. What matters is that I'm 58 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for the county. I raised 2 kids, mostly right. And I genuinely thought that the hardest thing I would ever go through in my life was burying my father. I was wrong about that. My wife and I had been married for 22 years. I won't say they were all perfect because that would be a lie, and I'm too old for lies. There were hard years. Years when money was tight and we barely spoke without it turning into an argument. Years when the kids were teenagers and we forgot how to be husband and wife because we were so busy being referees. But we came through all of it. Or I thought we did. My nephew, I'll call him by what he was to me, which was the son of my older brother, a kid I taught to throw a baseball, a kid I co-signed a car loan for when he was 24. He had been coming around our house for years. Sunday dinners, holidays. He'd helped me reshingle the garage roof the summer before. I trusted him the way you trust family, which is to say, completely. Which is to say, foolishly. I don't know when it started. I'm not sure I want to know. What I know is that by the time that receipt hit my kitchen floor, it had been going on long enough that they'd gotten comfortable. Comfortable enough to use real names on hotel reservations. Comfortable enough for him to leave evidence in a jacket pocket. Comfortable enough, I suppose, to stop worrying about me entirely. That's the part that took the longest to sit with. Not the betrayal itself. The comfort of it. I gave him my truck and I watched him back out of the driveway, and then I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't drink, and I thought about everything I'd missed the weekends she'd been visiting her sister. The evening she'd worked late at the dental office, where she managed the front desk. The way she'd started sleeping on her side, facing the wall, when she used to sleep facing me. Small things. Individual. They meant nothing. Together, they meant everything. I'm not a man who cries easily. I grew up in a household where my father expressed emotion the same way he expressed most things. Quietly, if at all. So I sat at that table and I didn't cry. I just did the math. Dates and distances and weekends that didn't add up. And the more I calculated, the colder I felt. By the time my wife came home from work that evening, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to say anything. Not yet. I want to explain something about that choice, because I know how it sounds. People hear, he didn't confront her immediately, and they think weakness, or denial, or some desperate need to hold on. That's not what it was. I've spent 31 years working in project management. You don't build infrastructure by reacting to every problem the moment you see it. You document, you assess, you understand the full scope of what you're dealing with before you make a single move. Because once you move, you can't unmove. Once you say the thing, you can't unsay it. I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with, so I started paying attention differently, not obsessively. I wasn't following anyone or installing anything on anyone's phone. I just started watching, listening, remembering. And what I found was that I hadn't missed as much as I thought. I just explained things away because I hadn't wanted to see them. The receipt was from 8 months ago. There had been others. I started finding small things. A coffee shop charge in a part of town neither of us had any reason to be in. A voicemail that got deleted before I could hear it. A Saturday afternoon where she said she was at the nail salon but didn't come home with fresh nails. Every single thing that I'd filed under probably nothing turned out to be something. I started keeping records, a simple notebook I kept in my truck. Dates, times, small observations. I wasn't building a case for a courtroom. I was building a case for myself, so that when the moment came, I would know exactly what I knew, and I would not be gaslit out of knowing it. 3 weeks after I found the receipt, my wife sat me down after dinner. She'd made pot roast, my favorite. I noticed that. I noticed the candles on the table too. Small, deliberate kindnesses that felt, in retrospect, like someone softening up the ground before they drove a post through it. She didn't cry before she started talking. I'll give her that. She looked at me straight on, and she said she needed to tell me something, and she needed me to hear the whole thing before I responded. I told her to go ahead. She told me she had been seeing someone. She said, seeing someone, like it was a thing people said, like it softened the edges of what she was actually telling me. She said it had been going on for about a year. She said she had not meant for it to happen. She said she was sorry, and I could see in her face that she meant it, which made it worse somehow, not better. And then she told me who it was. I already knew. But hearing her say his name out loud did something to me that I hadn't anticipated. I thought I was prepared. I thought 31 years of keeping my head meant I could absorb anything. But hearing her say his name, the name of the boy I taught to throw a curveball, that one got through. I didn't let her see that. I asked her one question. Just one. I said, "Is there anything else you need to tell me?" She looked at the table. She said she was pregnant. A moment is forgetting to pick up the dry cleaning. A moment is burning toast. A moment is saying something sharp in the middle of an argument that you immediately wish you could pull back. A year is not a moment. A pregnancy is not a moment. I sat at that table and I breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the same way I breathe on a job site when something has gone badly wrong and I need to stay functional. I looked at my wife, the woman I had shared a bed with for 22 years, who had sat beside me in the hospital when my mother was dying, who had slow danced with me at both of our kids' weddings, and I asked her to give me some time to think. She nodded. She looked relieved, which I found interesting. I went to bed. She slept in the guest room. And in the morning, I called my attorney. I want to be clear about something. I am not a vindictive man. I have never been interested in making anyone's life miserable out of spite. What I am is methodical. What I am is thorough. And what I understood from the moment I picked up that phone and dialed my attorney's number was that I needed to protect myself the way I should have been protected all along. My attorney is a woman I've known for about 15 years, sharp as anything, and completely unimpressed by nonsense. I told her everything in about 20 minutes. She didn't react the way people react in movies. She didn't gasp or say, "Oh my God." She just asked me a series of questions in a very calm voice, and at the end of the conversation, she told me what she needed from me and when she needed it. Over the next 6 weeks, I did 3 things. First, I got an understanding of our finances that was clearer than any I'd had in 22 years of marriage. We had a joint account, a retirement account, a money market I'd opened back in 2019, equity in the house, and a small investment account I'd started about 4 years earlier with an inheritance from my uncle. Some of these things were straightforward. Some required careful documentation. I didn't move anything. I didn't hide anything. I just understood exactly what was there. And I made sure my attorney understood it too. Second, I had a conversation with my financial advisor, a man I've worked with for 11 years, and we discussed my options going forward as a single person. I'm 58. Retirement is not abstract for me. It is close. I needed to understand what my life looked like on the other side of this, and I needed to understand it before emotions got involved in the math. Third, I stopped pretending, not to my wife. I still said good morning, still asked if she needed anything from the grocery store, still acted like a person who was thinking things through. But to myself. I stopped explaining things away. I stopped telling myself there was a version of this where I stayed and it was fine. There wasn't. I knew that. My gut had known it since the moment I picked up that receipt. I just needed my head to catch up. My wife's family got involved about a month in. I don't know who told them what, but one Sunday afternoon, her sister called me. I've always gotten along with her sister. She's a reasonable person, or I'd always thought so. She called and she said she just wanted to check in, see how I was doing, how we were doing, and I said we were managing, which was true in the narrowest possible sense. Then she said she hoped I was keeping an open mind. I asked her what she meant by that. She said that marriages go through hard seasons. She said people made mistakes, and the measure of a man was how he responded to those mistakes. She said she knew her sister had hurt me, and she knew I was angry, but that the baby was innocent and deserved a stable home, and that maybe I could find it in my heart to think about what kind of man I wanted to be through this. I said I appreciate you calling, and I hung up. The next week, it was her brother. He was less gentle about it. He said he understood I was upset, but that blowing up a family over something like this was an overreaction, and that real men didn't run away from hard situations. He actually used the phrase, "be the bigger man," which I found remarkable in its confidence, considering that the situation he was asking me to be big about involved my wife having a child with his cousin. I asked him a simple question. I said, "If this were your wife with your cousin, what would you do?" He didn't answer. I said, "I thought so," and I hung up. Her mother called twice. I didn't pick up. I have nothing against her mother, honestly. She's a 71-year-old woman who loves her daughter and was doing what mothers do. I just wasn't in a position to have that conversation in a useful way. I let it go to voicemail, and I deleted the messages without listening to them. My kids didn't know yet. That was the hardest part of those weeks, sitting at Sunday dinner with my daughter and her husband, listening to my son talk about his job over the phone, and carrying this thing that I hadn't told them. I decided not to tell them until I had something concrete to tell. I didn't want to do it in pieces. I didn't want them to find out the way I'd found out through a thing that fell and shouldn't have. I wanted to be able to sit down with them and explain what had happened and what I had decided, calmly, as a man who had a plan, not as a man in free fall. So I waited. The conversation I'd been preparing for came on a Tuesday evening in October. I had asked my wife to sit down at the kitchen table. I hadn't told her what it was about, and she came in from work looking wary, which I suppose was appropriate. She sat down across from me, and I noticed she looked exhausted. She was 4 months along by then. I noticed that too. I had a folder in front of me. Not thick. Just the relevant documents. My attorney had prepared a summary, and I had reviewed it enough times that I didn't really need it, but I wanted it there. I wanted the weight of paper on the table. I told her I had been doing a lot of thinking. I told her I appreciated that she had told me the truth, and I told her I understood that wasn't easy. I meant both of those things. Then I opened the folder. I walked her through our financial situation in detail, account by account, asset by asset. I told her what my attorney had recommended and why. I told her I had been working with a financial advisor to understand my position. I told her that I was not interested in litigation, that I had no desire to make this more painful than it already was, and that I had prepared a proposal that I believed was fair to both of us. I told her I wanted a divorce. She didn't look surprised. She looked sad, which was different. She asked me if there was anything she could say. I told her that I wasn't angry at her. I meant that too. I had been, in the beginning, in those first few weeks when the feeling was mostly just heat. But by October, it had burned through that. What I felt wasn't anger anymore. It was something quieter. Something that looked a lot like grief, actually. Grief for the marriage, for the version of us I'd thought we were, for the 22 years that were real, even if the ending wasn't what I'd imagined. I told her I'd loved her, past tense, present tense. Even at that table, I wasn't entirely sure which was accurate, but I told her, because she deserved to hear it one last time, and because I needed to say it. Then I pushed the folder across the table. My brother called me 3 days later. Now understand, my brother and I have had our differences over the years, but he has always been family in the way that counts. He called me and he said he'd heard what happened, and his voice sounded like what it was, which was a man who was ashamed of his son and didn't know exactly how to say that. He said he was sorry. I told him I knew. He asked me what I needed. I said, "Nothing right now, but I'll tell you when I do." We stayed on the phone for a while after that without saying much. That was enough. I did not tell him what I thought of his son. I didn't see the point. He was going to be the father of a baby, which meant he was going to have enough consequences to deal with without me adding to them. I didn't wish him harm. I just wished him completely out of my life, which is a different thing. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. It was not the cleanest process I've ever been part of, but it was cleaner than it could have been. We had a mediator for most of it, which helped. My wife was cooperative in a way that I think surprised her own attorney. She told me later, during one of the few direct conversations we had near the end, that she had stopped expecting me to come at her with everything I had, and that she was grateful I hadn't. I told her I hadn't done it for her sake. I'd done it because prolonged warfare costs money and time and energy. And at 58 years old, all three of those things are resources I'm not willing to burn. The house was the main point of negotiation. We'd owned it for 16 years. I bought her out. It took most of what I had in liquid savings, but I wanted to stay in it. My kids grew up in that house. My workshop is in the basement. I know every sound it makes at night, every creak in the hallway, the way light comes through the kitchen window in the morning in October. I wasn't leaving. I kept the house. I kept my retirement accounts, which my attorney had been very clear about from the beginning. She kept her car, her personal accounts, and the fair percentage of what we built together. My attorney thought I was being more than generous. Maybe I was, but I was also 58 years old and tired, and I didn't want to carry the weight of having been ruthless. Some things cost more than money. I told my kids in November. I sat them both down. My daughter came over in person, my son was on video, and I told them everything. Not everything, the broad shape of it. Their mother had made choices I couldn't live with. We had decided to divorce. They were adults. They could have their own relationships with their mother, whatever those look like. I was not interested in making them choose. My daughter cried. She has a kind heart, my girl. And she felt everything at once, sad for me, sad for her mother, confused about her uncle, angry on my behalf. I let her feel all of it. I didn't rush her through it. My son was quieter. He's more like me. He asked a few practical questions. Where was I going to be? Was the house going through? Was I okay financially? And I answered them honestly. Then he said, Dad, I'm sorry this happened to you. And something in me went sideways for just a second. Not long. A few seconds. I held it together. I told him I was going to be fine. And the thing was, I meant it. Not the way people say it to make other people stop worrying. I actually meant it. I'm going to tell you something that might sound strange after everything I've just described. The night the divorce was finalized, I came home to an empty house. My wife had moved out 3 months earlier, and I cooked dinner. Nothing complicated. Pork chops, roasted potatoes, a side salad. I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for something, though I'd never been exactly sure what. I sat at my kitchen table, in my kitchen, in my house, and I ate a quiet dinner by myself. And I thought, this is fine. Not fine in a broken way. Fine in the way that a thing can be hard and also okay at the same time. The house was still the house. The light was still the light. I still knew every sound it made. I had lost a marriage. I had lost an image of my life that I'd been carrying around for 22 years. I had lost. And this one took longer to admit. A version of my nephew that I'd believed in for decades. But I hadn't lost myself. That sounds like a greeting card. I know it does. But there's a difference between something sounding simple and something being untrue. I sat at that table and I ate my pork chops and I drank my wine. And I thought about all the mornings still in front of me. And they didn't feel like a consolation prize. They felt like mine. 6 months after the divorce, I signed up for a weekend woodworking class at the community college. I hadn't done anything with my workshop in years. Too busy, too tired, always something else. The class met on Saturday mornings. There were 8 of us, ranging in age from about 30 to what I estimated was about 75. The instructor was a retired cabinet maker named Pete, who had very strong opinions about grain direction and not a single one about anyone else's business. I made a small side table. Nothing fancy. Oak, with mortise and tenon joints. It took me 3 Saturdays and I ruined 2 pieces of wood before I got the joinery right. When I brought it home and set it in the corner of my living room, I stood there and looked at it for a long time. It wasn't perfect. There was a slight unevenness in one of the legs that I kept meaning to fix, and kept deciding to leave alone. But it was solid, honest, built the right way, slowly, one step at a time. I thought about how long it had been since I'd made something with my hands. I signed up for the next session. My nephew called me once, about 8 months after everything. I saw his name on my phone and I sat with it for 3 rings before I picked up. He said he wanted to explain. I told him explanations were for people who thought they were owed one, and that I didn't think he owed me an explanation, and that I didn't have anything to say to him right now, and that maybe someday that would change and maybe it wouldn't. He said he was sorry. I said I heard him, and I hung up. That was the last time we spoke. I don't know if it'll stay that way. I've made my peace with not knowing. Some doors you close all the way and lock behind you. Some you just leave shut for now and wait to see if you ever feel like turning the handle again. I haven't felt like it yet. People sometimes ask me, when they know enough of the story to ask, whether I regret the way I handled it, whether I wish I'd done something differently, blown up sooner, or harder, or louder. I don't. Not because I handled it perfectly. I'm sure I made mistakes. I won't even recognize as mistakes until years from now. But I stayed true to myself through the whole thing. And at 58 years old, after everything, that's not a small thing. That's most of the thing. There's a version of this story where I fell apart, where I confronted them both in some ugly public way, said things I couldn't take back, threw away my dignity along with everything else that was being taken from me. I've seen men do that. I understand the impulse completely. When you're in that kind of pain, the loudest option feels like the only one. But loud doesn't mean powerful. Loud means visible. And I wasn't interested in being visible in that moment. I was interested in being effective. My attorney, near the end of everything, said to me, "You know, most clients come in here and they want to burn something down. You came in and you wanted to build something." She meant it as a compliment. I took it as one. What I built was the rest of my life. It's smaller than the one I'd imagined. Quieter. The Saturday mornings smell like sawdust now instead of whatever she used to put in the slow cooker on weekends. My dining room table has exactly one placemat on it instead of two. When I watch the game, nobody talks through the fourth quarter, but it's mine. Every single square foot of it is mine. And I made my pork chops the other night, and I opened a decent Cabernet, and I sat at my kitchen table in my house in the light I know, and I thought about nothing in particular, and it was one of the best evenings I've had in years. Some people would call where I am now starting over. I don't see it that way. I see it as finally getting to start right.